At the top of the map here is the conceptual framework and context of the portfolio, which is that of early primary French immersion. It's also the context in which I work in the role of Grade 2 French immersion teacher and kindergarten chair. A little background on that. In Ontario, there are 3 types of French immersion programming, all of which employ French as the language of instruction. Late immersion begins in high school, middle immersion for students from 9 to 10 years of age, and finally early, which is the context that I work in, which begins in senior kindergarten. These senior kindergarten students have generally had no exposure to French and yet receive 100% of their instruction in this language, which can be stressful and unsettling for many. The 2 sub-entries in the map in pale blue here reflect my interest in the application of my master's learning to my professional practice in the form of 2 theses. The first, over here, is an action research study into French immersion and constructivism. It grew from the dissonance I experienced as a French immersion senior kindergarten teacher, where many of my students experienced great difficulties when immersed in the new language of instruction. My study sought to improve the ability of French immersion teachers to adhere more successfully to a constructivist teaching philosophy, as it's challenging to use constructivist techniques with children who neither speak nor understand the language of instruction. For this reason, many teachers fall back on more teacher-centric methods. My thesis examined what's meant by constructivism and looked into what I called the judicious use of English to facilitate the application of constructivism. Doing so required me to analyse how I was teaching at the time and to reflect, one of the themes, on what worked well, what I could change, what engaged my students, and how my students learned best. As you can see, from this entry stems the topic of 21st century learners, the learning environment, which is here, and of course reflective practice, which is one of the 3 themes. Coming down to 21st century learners, right here, let me enlarge it, there it is. What I examined was curriculum delivery and how this ought to reflect the needs of our children, pedagogy, and how constructivism can be effectively used within my context, the learning environment, and how this needs to engage students and reflect the ways in which they learn best. And finally, up here, digital literacy, another one of the themes, and one which is crucially important for the success of today's students, as well as adults. Digital literacy is one of the 3 themes of this portfolio, and one that informed many aspects of my learning. Digital literacy has been shown to positively impact student engagement. In addition, it raises very important questions about how we define reading and writing, which is down here in purple. The success of the purposeful and intelligent use of digital tools in schools relies extremely heavily on how and by whom, which speaks to the leadership and technology theme, how and by whom the technology is managed within the school as a whole. The research up here, which informed my learning in this field, included that of the New London Group, whose work is considered seminal to the new definitions that lie within digital literacies. Lessig, who writes prolifically to promote free culture via reform in the legal restrictions of copyright as a way to enable today's youth to express themselves. Leadership paradigms, down here in elementary schools, still adhere to old hierarchical practices and must over time be transformed to a shared or distributed model of leadership in order to provide opportunities and accountability to all members of staff and administration, and even students. The reason there's a number 4 in this orange bubble is because the 4 leadership paradigms that I looked at were shared, distributed, transformational, as well as communities of practice. In many schools, technological tools are purchased with absolutely no plan for intelligent integration into the curriculum or pedagogical approaches taken by classroom teachers, which is why teacher education is in here. In addition, many teachers are actually reticent to adapt their teaching to include technologies due to discomfort or insecurities regarding their competence. For this reason, I also looked into the research on teacher education programs, with a specific interest in technological pedagogy. The research I undertook within this theme was extensive and led to my initiating a study called Exploring the Relation Between Perceived Administrator Leadership Style and Teacher Use of Technology, and that applies to this blue bubble up here. This is included as an artifact in the portfolio since it serves as a synthesis of my accumulated learning and practice in leadership paradigms, current educational frameworks, and the use of digital technologies by both teachers and students, as well as the impact of digital literacies on student engagement. I touch on the notion of the digital divide, which is down here in orange, and how its definition has altered from having first described the split between those with access and those without, to becoming a descriptor for those benefiting from technological pedagogy that is informed and purposeful, versus those for whom technology is a tool randomly employed without thought to its potential for transformative learning. I'm going to demonstrate ways in which, in an ideal world, or even perhaps in the next 100 years or so, we can hope to have established new leadership practices in the field of education so that responsibilities are shared and all members of the school staff are involved in decision making, educating peers, and supporting them when going through the uncomfortable process of change. Finally, reflective practice, the third theme. This theme is in fact diffused into everything I learned during my master's journey, and therefore also in every aspect of the portfolio. Major authors that I studied over here in pink included Dewey as an important theorist on the nature of learning, as well as the first to write extensively about experience, interaction, and reflection, and to provide a definition thereof. Schoen, who is down here, considered the father of reflection, and whose published works in this field spanned over 20 years, derived the terms reflection in and on action. Additional research included but was not limited to the works of Bood, Day, Carr, and Kemmis, Kolb, Brookfield, and Argyris. There are various iterations of reflective practice, for example, the notion of mentoring, which is down here, an important practice for the deliberate and measured scaffolding of learning from complete support to the gradual release of responsibility. The critical friend is discussed in my artifact, the pop culture unit, in some detail, and also the idea of metacognition, which is down here, that appears throughout the portfolio as a critical component in reflective practice and important to professional development, student learning, and personal growth. I explore via the artifacts within the theme of reflective practice the benefits of its sustained and purposeful use, which are multiple, most particularly in its ability to provide a scientific framework for personal and professional development.